folks!
Hey allihopa!
Welcome to another video.
Today we are rounding up the month of June.
And what a month it was. My first book was Les Ricoux de l'Horloge by Maurice Leblanc. This is one of the Arsène Lupin books. I mentioned it in our previous video actually. I really enjoyed it. It's a great sequel. It's got short little shenanigans. It's a collection of 8 short stories, and it's just fun. You know, he's just a silly little man doing his silly little man things, and that's what I wanted from it.
The first book I finished this month was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Wong, and this is a very lyrical book about a young boy growing up in the US, and he's from Vietnam, and kind of him coming to terms with who he is, and then his relationship to his mom and his grandmother and their kind of trauma and so on. It was okay. I don't know, I liked it, but I also had problems kind of getting into it. But overall, it was a decent book, and I would recommend people reading it probably. It was an okay book.
The next book I read was New and Selected Poems by Mary Oliver. This I also mentioned in our previous video. It's a collection of her poetry just through the ages, and it's in backwards chronology, so you read her most recent poems first, and then it goes back in time to her earliest published poems. And then there's some poems that haven't been published anywhere else, which is kind of cool. And I haven't read anything by her before, but she is a nature poet, or she writes about nature quite a lot. And she's also a lesbian, and is lesbian poetry, but not about being a lesbian. It just has the aura of lesbian poetry, which I loved. I really liked it. And I will probably see if I can get some of the collections that they took excerpts from.
The next book I read was Yuanis Room by James Baldwin. This follows an American in the US, no, in France. Sorry. He's in France. He's kind of escaping his duties in the US. His dad wants him to come back and get some job and get married or whatever, and he's oh, whatever. And then he has a girlfriend, but she's gone to Spain to think about things. And then he meets Giovanni, who he kind of strikes up this relationship with, and then bad things happen. Basically, I thought this was going to be a much better book because it's a classic LGBT plus book. But it was very misogynistic and very homophobic. It kind of looked down upon men who are gay men who are more feminine. And I was just this is a classic. The only thing that was really good in it was the writing. I thought the way he wrote the book was really, really good, and I want to read other books by him. But yeah, I'm quite surprised that this is a classic. I guess it was one of its first of its kind or whatever. But yeah, it could have been better, is all I'm going to say.
When you're starved of content, what you have is what you get.
Gotta take everything, the slim pickings.
Yes. The next book I finished was Living Weapon by Rowan Ricardo Phillips. It was billed as a bit of a sweeping look at what's been happening in the world recently. And other than 2 poems about COVID, I didn't really feel that. This was published in 2021, so very recent, but I didn't really feel it captured my imagination in the way that I thought it would. The way it was described was a grand look at the happenings, and then a bunch of the poems are him just in Spain, just chilling. And that's fine, but I probably would have had different expectations if they hadn't talked about how grand it was, and it just didn't feel grand to me. The poetry was technically very good. I felt I had been let down because what I was expecting was not what was there. I'll probably see what else he's written.
The next book I listened to was The Flat Chair by Beth O'Leary. This is about two people who share a flat, but so basically the main character, she can only be in the flat between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. and the other guy is there during the day because he works the night shift as a nurse in the hospital. Obviously quite a weird premise, but it was quite fun. It was very sweet, and I really liked it. The main character has had like a boyfriend, and as the kind of novel progressed, you realize that he gaslit her throughout the relationship. And I mean, enjoyed is like a weird word, but it was like well written in the way that it felt like this is probably the way it is. Her realizing the trauma and kind of being like, actually, what the fuck just happened or whatever. It was really good. The romance was kind of sweet, very kind of slow burn. But yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, if you want like a sweet, cute little romance, I would recommend. I mean, obviously, content warning for past trauma. Overall, it was decent.
The next book I read was La Comtesse de Cariostro, also by Maurice Leblanc, another one of the Arsène Lupin books. It was fine. It's him very early in his career, so before he's really established himself and made his name. He is wooing this woman, and then he is sneaking around in her dad's house, as you do, and he finds a letter that seems to imply that the father and some of his friends or people that he knows are going to murder someone. And so he's like, I've got to stop this. And this woman that they're going to murder, he like kind of falls in love with her. He basically falls in love with any woman, which is very annoying because it's like completely unbelievable. I mean, is that how men are? I don't know. But I just like, he sees a pretty woman and he's immediately like, I would die for you. So, and this is the countess of the title. He thinks that she's amazing, and then there's like dark secrets, and he was very flip-floppy because there's these two women, and like one chapter he's totally into one, and then the next he's into the other, and then he flips back to the first one, and then he's back to this. So I thought that it wasn't his best work, but it was cool to have this woman who was very self-possessed and who just kind of was off doing things, living her life.
The next book I read was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, and this is the same author who wrote Red, White and Royal Blue, which I really enjoyed. This is about August, who moves to New York to go to university, and then one day when she's like on the Q train, she sees this girl and is like, wow, she looks amazing. And then she realizes that this woman, Jane, is stuck on the train like in time. So she's like from the 1970s and she can't leave the train basically. I enjoyed this book. However, I think the main problem with the book is that Jane can't leave the train. So it's very kind of like August goes to the train, talks to Jane. We see her at work. We see her at her house meeting her friends. Could she go back to the Q train kind of? So it's very like obviously the plot moves forward, but I feel like because Jane can't interact outside, it kind of gives a bit of static feel. Even though like a lot of things that August thinks and says is like, I'm like, oh, actually I can see myself in like her as a character. I love all the like side characters, like they really feel like real people. So like the movie that I can like compare it to is Kate and Leopold, in which like Hugh Jackman comes to the modern day New York, and he can obviously interact with everything, and he's like kind of, you know, fish out of water or whatever, which makes it a bit more funny and interesting because he doesn't understand like modern technology or whatever. And I kind of feel like Jane could have had like something similar where she can like at least go somewhere. I don't know. It just made it a bit like static. Yeah. But it was overall like a pretty good book. I feel like if you want like a nice sapphic romance, this is really good. And also a thumbs up for a lot of like good representation in this book as well.
The next book I read was Le Par-dessus d'Arsène Lupin by Maurice Leblanc again. I read a lot of Arsène Lupin books this month. This is actually more of a novella. It's less than 100 pages. And it's just like one story, and almost all of it happens in a police inspector, I think. He's like, I don't know the grades, but he's some guy in the police. A crime was committed, and basically Arsène Lupin has insinuated himself into the situation. It's set after World War I, and the family who is brought into the office, they illegally got their son, who died during World War I, to be buried in the like unknown soldier grave, which is a huge deal at this time, and for me had absolutely no emotional impact. I mean, I'm sure that at the time it would have been super shocking, but I was kind of like, I mean, it's not great, but like, is this really... They were threatening to like throw them in jail forever, and I was just kind of like... Basically what he does is he gives the man who's leaving the wrong jacket, his own jacket, so that the man has to come back without his wife, and he can confess that they didn't actually commit the crime. He just made his wife think that they'd committed the crime so that she could rest happy, knowing that her son was being like remembered, even though he's under like the unknown soldier grave, but she would know that he's there, and lots of people would be going there to like grieve. So she wanted people to be grieving at his grave, basically, and her husband made her think that that was actually his grave, but it wasn't. A little bit convoluted and complicated, and I didn't think it was very good.
The next book I read was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, who has also written The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six, which I both have read. So this follows the family of Mick Riva, or the Riva family. I think Mick is in The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo as like one of the husbands. Yeah, so he's like a singer, and then he like rises to fame and then kind of leaves his family, and then you follow the children in the 1980s. You also like kind of follow Mick and his wife June and like their romance, and then you follow the children, and it takes place during one day where the oldest sister has like this annual party. All these kind of things happen. I thought it was pretty interesting. I really liked the bits like in the beginning when you both followed the kids, and then you followed the parents in like the 1950s, 60s, because it was very like tragic. I don't know, I feel like I kind of wanted a bit more. The book, the way that it ended, I was just like, okay, like I kind of wanted some more more out of it, I guess. But overall it was like a decent book if you want like kind of fame and drama. It's very kind of soapy in that way, but I enjoyed reading it. Like it was perfectly alright, and I would probably read more by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think when she writes about like famous people, it's very interesting. Obviously both previous books that I read by her have been about like famous, even though I didn't like Daisy Jones and the Six that much. But Evelyn Hugo is really good. A very quick read, I would say.
The next book I read is Gods and Graven Images, The Chalk Hill Figures of Britain by Paul Newman. No, not the actor. There's a lot of archaeologists who have the same name as a famous Hollywood actor. I know of at least 3 or 4, and I don't remember them at the moment, but they exist. It's weird. Tom Holland? What's that about? I really enjoyed this. This is something that I'm personally interested in academically, but I can see how most people would not be into it. It's basically, there's a lot of chalk hill figures like this on the cover. People in the past would dig through the grass and dirt until you reach the chalk underneath, and then it would be a drawing like the Nazca lines, kind of. Not quite the same scale usually, but quite large. You can see them from quite far away, and it kind of is a discussion of the history of them, what we know, conjecture, and then also who we think made them, and a discussion of who studied them previously, which I thought was kind of interesting. The only thing I think it really lacked was his own interpretation. He doesn't really interpret any of them. So he lists like, and so said this, and then this person said this, and this person said this, and then he doesn't say what he thinks. And I think that would have been kind of interesting, considering he's like considered to be an expert. Like I would have wanted more of his opinion. If you want to learn more about some cool drawings on the ground, then you could read this. Yeah, and there's like pictures and stuff. Very brief exploration of folklore in Britain as well, which I'm personally interested in.
The next book I read was In Deep Waters by F.T. Lukens. This is a debut I'm pretty sure. This follows Tal. I don't remember any of the characters' names. And he's like going on his European tour. This is set in like some sort of fictional 1700s, 1600s or whatever. He's like a prince, the fourth in line or something, and he has magic as well. He can like conjure flames. While on the ship that he's traveling on, they find a shipwreck where this person is on, which is the redhead on the cover, and his name is Athlin. And it turns out that Athlin is a mermaid, and then it's kind of like about, I don't really know, like there was so much stuff happening, like Tal gets kidnapped by pirates, and then there's like this interpolitics between this fictional country and the other countries, and his oldest sister, who's like in line for the throne, is gonna marry someone, but then that person's sister wants something. It was just like a lot of stuff that I thought could have been more expanded upon, and maybe like a duology, because I feel like it was just like a lot, and then it kind of felt like this happened and this happened and this happened, and I kind of just wanted a bit more intertwined things, I guess. But yeah, I mean, obviously the pirates works for the opposing country or whatever, but it was kind of cute and sweet. I felt like this is a younger, like lower end young adult. If you are like a 13-year-old who wants to read like a queer fairy tale, this is probably kind of perfect for them, but it felt a little bit too young for me to read. I mean, the cover was pretty, so I'm a sucker for pretty covers.
The next book I read was La Demoiselle aux yeux verts by Maurice Leblanc, another Arsène Lupin book. And this is another one where he sees a pretty woman and is immediately like, I should just follow her. So he follows her to a cafe where there's another pretty woman, and one of them has blue eyes and one of them has green eyes, which is the title. And so he follows her onto a train, and then she gets murdered on the train. And he thinks that one of the people who was with the person who murdered her is the other woman. So now he's like, is she a bad guy? She gets captured, he saves her, and he's like already in love with her. Immediately he saw her and he was just like, she's beautiful, I must be in love. So he is trying to figure out who killed this woman, who turns out to be a master criminal, even though she looked very respectable. He also promised her before she died that he would not let her father know that she was a master criminal, but he didn't realize what the secret was. She was just like, the stuff in my bag, don't let my dad see it. But then the stuff is stolen by someone else. All this stuff happens. It was kind of fun, but again, you just don't have to fall in love with every pretty woman. Like, is this how straight men live? How do you concentrate on anything? This is a theme that I felt with quite a few books in this month, but how do you concentrate if as soon as you see a good-looking person, you're like, I'm in love with you? They solve this mystery, and she's apparently some heiress, but there's other people trying to get her fortune, but they don't know what the fortune is, so they have to go find it, and it's like the Fountain of Youth, except she decides, because so many people have been killed in pursuit of it, that she doesn't want it, so they let it be covered up by a lake. And that's the end. He's like, do you want to marry me? And she's like, maybe. And then she escapes to Belgium. And she writes him a letter being like, no thanks. I liked the twists and turns of this book. You can just be interested in stuff. You don't have to fall in love to want to find out who the murderer is. Is this what allosexuals are like all the time? I don't know.
The next book I read, or well, listened to, was Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. And this is the third book in the Witchland series. The fourth one came out in June, so I figured maybe I should read the third one. I mean, I don't really want to like, oh, this is what the book is about, because it might spoil like the other two books. But basically, the Witchland is about Safi and Iseult, who are thread sisters. Safi is like a truth witch, so she can like tell when someone's telling the truth. Iseult is a thread witch, which means that she can kind of see people's threads. It's kind of like she can see people's auras, so she can tell like how they're feeling or whatever. Because Safi's like, because of her magic, she's very, like, sought after. People are trying to, like, kidnap her and stuff. They get, like, a blood witch on their trail, surprisingly, and he can obviously smell anyone's scent, kind of. It's a very good series, I would say. It kind of feels very thought out, like the world and the characters feels that way as well. I would recommend this series. It's a pretty good fantasy series in general.
The next book I read is Lumen by Tiffany Atkinson. I was initially very into this because the first half is about chronic pain, and I have that. So I was like, this is gonna be super cool. Like, you don't really see a lot of poems like that. But I did not particularly like the style. So it's found poems, excerpts from things that you've seen or heard that are put into a poem, like created, and I did not like it. I don't think that's a reflection of the value of the author. Just personally, it wasn't my thing. And then the rest of the poems I didn't really connect with either. A lot of them were about unsuccessfully trying to have a baby, which I cannot connect with at all. Also, if you want a baby, there are plenty of babies that you can adopt. I don't understand the genetic need. Like, you don't need to have them be genetically related to you for them to be a baby. So that's my solution to, like, infertility. I mean, I know that people want it for reasons, but I don't understand the reasons. And so I was not able to connect with a lot of the poems, which is a shame. Maybe there are other poems that I would like better by this author. As it is, I wasn't particularly into it.
The next book I read was The Music of What Happens by Bill Konigsberg. So this follows Jordan and Max, and they have like an old food truck that Jordan's dad had, but he's passed away now because of reasons. Max ended up working with Jordan in the food truck. And they go to the same school, but they don't really know each other at all. That kind of goes from there. And then Max has some sort of secret, and then they kind of end up falling in love, sort of, and then kind of growing together. I liked the second half of this book a lot more than I enjoyed the first half. I felt like the first half was kind of slow going, but the second half was much better, especially when they kind of started talking about things. It deals with like sexual assault on men, which I thought was a good thing to talk about in a book, and I thought that discussion was really good. And overall, the second half was much better because it kind of brought a lot of things onto the table discussion wise between the characters. So yeah, I would recommend reading this if you are a teenager, probably. I didn't like the way it was written. It was very written in a talky way, that kind of like easy style, which made me kind of like, it's just too, not simplistic, but it just was annoying to read. Other than that, it was pretty good.
The next book I read was L'homme à la peau de bique by Maurice Leblanc. This is another Arsène Lupin book. He doesn't participate in any of the action in this. There's a crime that is committed, and then the newspapers are all like, no one knows how he did it. And one of the newspapers is like, I know Arsène Lupin would be able to do it, but he's too chicken to. The solution is that he writes like a response and it's published in the newspaper, and that's like basically what you read. It's also completely and on purpose a ripoff of an Edgar Allan Poe story.
Oh.
Spoilers, the murder is not committed by a human, but is committed by a monkey. But obviously it's not murder because the monkey doesn't know any better. And it also has like racist overtones because it's implied that it's not like a chimpanzee or something, but like another homo genus species, one that we would normally think is extinct. We know that it's extinct, but at the time they were like, maybe they still live somewhere in, say, Southeast Asia or something. So it had that kind of racist side to it that I did not like. I didn't think the story was very engaging. It was very confusing, also like confusingly written. Don't read this. This is also very short. It was less than 100 pages, but don't bother.
Thank you, next.
Yeah.
The next book I listened to was Normal People by Sally Rooney. It was available on my library, so I thought, why not? This is a book that I wasn't really initially interested in reading because it was on the library. I thought, no one else has borrowed it, so I'm going to borrow it. And this follows, oh God, I can't even remember the character's name, Marianne and Connell in Ireland. They go to the same school, and then Connell's mom cleans Marianne's parents' house, so they kind of know each other, but like when they're at school, they kind of like don't talk because it's like Marianne is considered very strange and Connell is very popular. But when Connell comes to pick up his mom, they usually kind of talk and hang out, and then they kind of start a relationship. Later, they go to the same university, where Marianne is then kind of popular and well adjusted to some degree, and Connell is kind of shy and the outsider. They both kind of stumble through university and they kind of have this relationship, but then they date other people, and it was okay. I kind of felt like if I had read this while I was at university, I would probably have enjoyed it a little bit better, but because I'm now at the end of my life, it was just a bit like, yeah, everyone has kind of felt something akin to what they're feeling. I didn't was like, wow, normal people, eh? And then I kind of had like some issues with how Marianne's character was written. I get it, she had like a kind of like a traumatic childhood, and then she kind of starts seeking out like kind of abusive relationships, but I was just like, do we have to have another woman with another abusive relationship? I kind of felt like I have read this type of like character and slash the way that she behaves before. It didn't really bring anything new. Also, every single side character was so forgettable. I'm like, was there other characters in this book? They felt very lifeless. Pretentious is this what I would call this book. I mean, like, not in like necessarily a bad way, but it was just like a bit pretentious.
The next book I read was A Little Gay History, Desire and Diversity Across the World by R.B. Parkinson. I quite liked this. I thought it was good. It uses objects that are at the British Museum to talk about sexuality and gender in the past all over the world. I will say that it has a very strong bias for white gay things, and that tracks because the guy who wrote it was white and gay, which fair, but I felt like he really de-emphasized some of the gender aspects that I thought were, because I also knew about some of the subjects, I felt like he really toned it down in a way that he didn't need to. Like, he could have been a bit more explicit about it. Sometimes he wrote things and it kind of sounded like some people have possibly thought that this meant this, but actually, like, it's mainstream to think that. It's not like a theory that one intrepid person has written about and no one believes it. Most people do agree that they were gender variant, for example. And because this was a subject that I knew about, I felt a little bit like I couldn't be sure about the other ones that I didn't know about, whether it was accurate, which was a problem. But the illustrations are really nice. Each 2-page spread is talking about one or two objects, and then it talks about the context, the historical context, which is cool. But yeah, it doesn't cover a particularly broad spectrum of what I would have imagined. It's mostly like gay. I mean, when he says a gay little history, he definitely means gay rather than like queer. And I think he discusses at the beginning of the book that he specifically chose gay because queer was controversial. And I would argue that he chose gay because he meant gay and not queer.
The final book I listened to this month was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. A classic. I'm like, should I tell you what it's about? I mean, I feel like most people do. A guy who gets to know Gatsby and all this fancy life in New York.
Rich people shit.
Yeah, definitely rich people shit. Anyway, I enjoyed it. I didn't really have any expectations going in, so I was pleasantly surprised by like how it was written and like what it was about and stuff. I mean, obviously some things are of its time, but overall I really enjoyed it. I'll probably read other books by F. Scott Fitzgerald if this is the level of writing. I also really enjoyed the audiobook. I don't remember who narrated it, but if I do, it will be here now. Because I had a feeling when I was gonna read it, like listen to it, that it was just gonna be like monotone, no inflection. But this guy who narrated it was so good. Like, voices for all characters. I don't know, it just really brought the book to life a lot, and that's a good narrator. I think I gave it like 4 stars, so I enjoyed it.
The next book I read was L'Agence Barnett et Compagnie by Maurice Leblanc. This is the last Arsène Lupin of this month, I promise. And this is a lot closer to the Sherlock Holmes stuff. A crime is committed, and then the police come to him, and he helps solve it. It's also uniquely Arsène Lupin in that he almost always steals something from the victims, who invariably turn out to have been awful people. So they're like crooks, or they've actually murdered someone, and he ends up like stealing their money or blackmailing them in some way, so they give him money, which is kind of fun and amusing. And it was very lighthearted. I quite enjoyed it. If you only want to read some of the books, this is one of the books that you could read. The last book I read this month was Fairest, a memoir by Meredith Toulousan. This is about Meredith, who is a transgender woman who was born in the Philippines and then moves to the US. I think there is an age gap in our queer experiences that was very jarring for me. Also, most of the book talks about before her transition and when she thought that she was a gay man, and there's a lot of sexual content in here, and I don't care about it. Like, I just don't really need it. And also, this is another book where I was thinking, do all allosexual people constantly think about sex with other people all the time? Because she would meet someone, and I'm going to use she pronouns throughout, even when talking about before her transition. She would like meet someone and they would introduce themselves, and then she'd immediately be thinking about having sex with them. And that is such a foreign concept to me. It was very strange for me, and a lot of the book is taken up thinking about or in some way trying to act out like a sexual fantasy with other people, and it did not connect for me at all. And I think you can really tell that they're from an older queer generation than I am, because most of the people that I know who are queer don't have the same ideas about what being queer means, and you know, that's fine. It just was very jarring for me. Definitely, I think people should read it. It is very interesting, but be prepared to be thinking about sex constantly throughout the whole book.
Okay.
And that's everything that we've read. Yes.
We did it.
We did do it.
The sound might have changed because we had to take a break, but now we're gonna talk about the books we hauled. So the first book I got this month is Jasmine Throne by Tessa Shuri, which I'm currently also reading. This is a sapphic fantasy about 2 women. One of them is like a maid, and the other one is like a princess who is being held captive in this like kind of old, it's like an old temple, which the maid has like some history with. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, I'm not that far in. This is also the Illumicrate edition, so it has some stencils and then like the spread edges.
First book that I got is Labyrinth by Kate Moss. This is probably one of the trashiest books I've ever bought.
Cat Moss, no, okay, I thought it was the model. I was like, wow, she's written such a big book.
Yes, well, I think she's also a historian.
Oh, I see.
It's crazy how they all have names. Anyway, but so I think I read a few years ago, I read one of her other books. I was reading the back of this, and it sounds almost exactly like the other one, which has a red cover. And basically, a woman in the present finds some artifact or some history, and so it's narrating both the past and the present, and they're somehow linked.
Oh.
Yes. I quite enjoyed the other one, so I thought, this is £1. I will buy it, and I'll read it. I think it's quite an old book. 2005. It's been around. I'll probably just read it in July, and it'll be very quick.
This is the Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson, and this is a continuation of the Truly Devious books. So this is like a new storyline. The previous one has been wrapped up in the previous trilogy, so this is like a new one. I think this features Stevie going to like a camp, like a summer camp place, and trying to figure out like a murder or something. I'm really excited. I think like a lot of the previous characters as like her friends and stuff comes back as well. I don't just want Stevie, I want all the previous characters. I really love the previous series, so I'm hoping that this will be just as good.
The second and last book that I got is Scottish Love Poems, edited by Antonia Fraser. I have a collection, an anthology of Scottish women's poetry, which I really enjoyed. So I thought I would get this. I'm hoping it's not going to be just like one famous poet who shall not be named, just because I like a little bit of variety, and I also, when I read these kinds of anthologies, I want to discover new poets, so hopefully it's not just the same old fuddy-duddies. No offense to them, I mean a little offense, but not a lot of offense to them. But I want to know new people, or people that I've not heard of before. I'm excited to dive into this.
The next book I got was The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nhi Wo. The reason why I read The Great Gatsby is because I want to read this, because apparently a lot of the stuff that happens in this book is like related to the storyline in The Great Gatsby, and I obviously hadn't read it before, so I wanted... Well, I watched the Baz Luhrmann version, which is the best version. I'm excited to read this. The cover is beautiful. Also, it's a short book, which is great. Love short books. The next book I got from Illumicrate was Ace of Spades by Farida Abike-Yemidi. This is like an Illumicrate exclusive, so it's like a hardback of the UK cover, which I think is only then published in paperback. Oh yeah, it has like a white cover, and I think it's signed as well. I love signed books. Signed. This is like a dark academia, queer, talks about systemic racism, and has some fantasy elements or something. Anyway, everyone's been talking about it, so I'm really excited to dive into it. And I don't know too much about the plot. I'm assuming it's about these two characters. The next book I got from Fairyloot is Witches Steeped in Gold by Sianan Smart.
I think it's Shannon.
Shannon? Smart.
Yeah, it sounds like an Irish spelling.
Me and my Swedish. So this is, I think, about two sisters. It's like Jamaican lore inspired, I think. Obviously beautiful cover. And it has like some art underneath the dust jacket. Yeah, I'm very excited to read this as well. I'm not sure when. It's just too many books to read. I do want to read it. I've heard pretty good things about it. So, and last but not least, I got Witch Shadow, which is the fourth book in the Witchland series. This is the only book in the series that I own physically, but I want to get like a set of the other books in the series. But yeah, I'm really excited to read this. I think this is mainly focusing on Isolde.
The Thread Witch.
The thread one. You can see
I listen.
I guess this is the threads. Hopefully it will be good. And that's it. No more books.
No more.
Not that much of a haul this month. To be fair, I'm glad I didn't haul that many books.
Yeah, I feel like I can't keep up with the reading if I get too many.
Struggle.
Yes, eternal struggle. Yeah, I went through a phase where I collected a lot of books and didn't read almost any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm trying to read the backlog.
Yes. Me too, even though then I buy new books and I'm like, oh, I'll just read this one instead.
We both read quite a lot this month, I think.
Most of the books I read this month was audiobooks, so...
Yeah, same.
It's just a faster way to consume books, because you can do other shit at the same time.
Top tip from us.
Yes, which no one has ever suggested before. Ever.
We're the first people.
Yes. Leave a comment down below about the books you read this month.
Yeah.
Or have you read any books we read?
And like, subscribe. You can also see us in other places, which are
Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, where we are Tessa Norlin. Very easy to find us.
Hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll see you soon.
Hejdå!
Bye! A lot closer. Hi, Scamp.